Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today at Modern Sales Power Hour. I'm Pete Kazanjy. I'm so pumped to have the illustrious Teri Long here from CB Insights. Super pumped. So Teri, while people are kind of like trickling in here, any big plans this weekend upcoming that that you're super pumped about?
Well, this weekend's going to be a lot of kid activities, lacrosse and soccer, and next weekend is going to be some mudding with our side-by-side and a little bit of fishing. Should be really fun.
I love it. What sort of fish are you going to be going after next weekend?
We'll probably go after the northern, some of the bass. There's some good crappie fishing too, so that we can fry them up. But yeah.
The northern are fun to catch, but they're kind of hard to eat. Like so many bones.
There are so many bones, but there's a really I do the flaying in our family, and there's some awesome electro flay knives that you can get. Really good. And so you don't run into the bones. The other thing is you can actually pickle northern, if you did not know that. So there's a
I'm
pickled
learning
northern.
all sorts of things. I thought I was going to learn about like modern sales, but
I will send you the recipe, but you can actually once you actually go through the process of cleaning and flaying, you can cube it
yeah.
all up and pickle it. It's great.
Amazing. That's awesome. Pickled northern.
Yes.
That I think my 4-year-old will be all over that. Wonderful. Well, everybody, thanks for coming. We'll get this party started here. So welcome to Modern Sales Power Hour. I'm Pete Kazanjy. And so while we're kind of getting started here, I'd like everyone to kind of get a little familiar with the Zoom interface here. So this event really encourages audience participation. So please do use the chat panel as much as possible. The chat panel, Q&A panel, et cetera, et cetera. We really want to make sure that we're here answering your questions. There were a bunch that were submitted ahead of time, but we have Teri's big brain here. We have my, mediocre brain here, really just to answer your biggest questions regarding modern sales and specifically enablement, rep enablement, manager enablement, all sorts of things, training, leverage, et cetera, et cetera. So for those who are not familiar, Power Hour is hosted by Modern Sales Pros. MSP is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, enablement, sales development, all the related disciplines. And so the community's mission is pretty simple. It's to create an environment for our 30,000 members to answer questions they struggle to answer on their own, help them see around corners they may not know about, just get better. Right? That's what we're in the business of, helping people get better. Right? And so the way that we do that is with great live sessions like what you're about to experience today. We have a pretty robust online forum. We have in-person events, which are really delightful as well. We actually have a number of in-person events coming up with an upcoming summit that we're having, one in New York, one in San Francisco. And so for those who weren't previously in MSP, we'll go ahead and add you after the event here. So before we get started, just a couple of reminders here. So Power Hour is kind of a unique format. There's not really a specific piece of content that we're going through. Instead, we're really kind of just like, we're here to get the knowledge and pick the brain of our illustrious guests, more about which in a second here. And so what we want to do is we want to have people participate as much as possible and ask questions, et cetera, et cetera. So, with that, let's go ahead and get into some introductions here. I'll make mine super quick. I'm Pete Kazanjy. I'm the founder of Modern Sales Pros. I'm also the co-founder and CRO of Atrium. Just really quick on Atrium, we make data-driven sales management software that helps sales managers, so AE, SDR, AM, CSM managers use metrics and data to improve rep performance. Also the founder of Modern Sales Pros and wrote a book on startup sales called Founding Sales. But a lot of people kind of already know me from this. More importantly is our guest, Teri, today. Teri, can you introduce yourself and let people know kind of like what you get up to at CB Insights and some of the other roles that you've had?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you, Pete, for having me. This is a really fun opportunity. Teri Long, as you said, and I'm the VP of Enablement at CB Insights. I've been at CB Insights now for about a year in the enablement space for about 16 years in a leadership role. And prior to that, I spent quite a few years doing some random things, some project management, some marketing, before that, I was actually a rep, quota carrying rep for 10 years. So
Yeah, buddy.
I feel as if that gave me the foundation and insight I needed to really get my feet, anchored well in enablement and in the enablement space. So I've had some unique opportunities with Stream Sets, Code 42, Informatica, Deluxe, a couple other organizations as well. And I try to stay very involved in all of the up and coming, SES, SEC, you name it. There's so many different enablement societies out there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I'm really pumped because we haven't had an enablement pro on Power Hour for a hot second, and I'm really passionate about enablement, specifically like manager enablement, kind of like leverage there. So I'm pumped for folks to be able to kind of hear your thoughts on things. So we can go ahead and get started here. So I think one thing that kind of pops to mind around there's like this great resignation thing happening right now. You got a lot of folks who are kind of like entering the workforce right now during like a particularly weird moment of time where like working in the office or working remote is in flux, and there's like all sorts of like wacky stuff going on, et cetera. And so when you have these like SDRs, BDRs, et cetera, kind of like new grads coming out of college, how do you guys approach like giving them a framework for success and really kind of like getting them on the right track and kind of getting them jamming?
Yeah, that is such a great question. I would say what we uncovered over the last year was it's a combination of both ramping them up from a rep perspective, but there's also just a life skill piece that is missing.
Oh my gosh.
So it's this new, I call this new phase of enablement where we're not only enabling you to perform in your role, but we're also enabling you to perform in life.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is we have new hires who have never stepped foot in an organization. They were out of college, they got their first job, their laptop in their mom's basement, and and that's the truth. And so we actually, there's a lot of data that we started to dig into, and what we found essentially after we did a very long listening tour as well as looked into some data is they just didn't know how to do anything. And what I mean anything is there was not a framework that said, hey, you wake up in the morning and here's your calendar, and what does my calendar look like, and how do I organize my day, and how do I prioritize this over that? And when do I prioritize MQLs, for instance, over the rest of my lead list?
Sure.
Some of the very fundamental things, not to mention the fact that when you and I were in sales, at least myself, I was shadowing. I went in the office, and so
exactly.
So you're learning by watching and being part of it. What we realized pretty quickly is they're not doing that. And even though we have gone and we have other tools that help do onboarding type things like shadowing, it's still not the same. So, I mean, the way that we ended up solving for it, I could go on and on about how many different things that we've tried. We ended up.
What were the hacks? What were the tactics?
Well, the original tactics were just keep doing one-off training, and what we all know is that's not scalable, and quite honestly, it's not repeatable, right?
Because like in one ear and kind of like out the other as well.
Right.
As with all of us, it's nothing about no knock on SDRs. It's just like humans, right?
Yeah, we needed something different, and so what we came up with was the Sdr Playbook, and the playbook is their guide. It is their playbook from very start to finish. It has everything in it about how to do my job, how to run my day,
I love it.
how to prioritize my time. It has all the built-in workflows. So now I don't necessarily have to go ask. It's click the link, and guess what? That hyperlink's taking me out to all of the job aids or the quick reference guides I need to navigate through the systems. We saw
That's
huge
awesome
success with that. Now it also required a lot of manager accountability and coaching, which to your point, but that was what we found worked very well because it was part of onboarding then. And
it's so hard to do that because what you end up with is like, I mean, and I'm like totally guilty of this myself, is you end up kind of like accreting all of this like cultural knowledge or like tribal knowledge or whatever. And so like everyone's kind of got it. They got a piece of this in this person's brain, a piece of this in this person's brain. And so really kind of like sitting down and be like, no, this has to be like dumped into an external brain, which is like a Google document or like a slide deck or or whatever, like that actually takes a lot of kind of intestinal fortitude to like sit down and be like, cool, you actually have to block your calendar for a whole week and do that. It's like, well, but I got all these meetings. It's like, cool, but if you don't do things with leverage, you're just going to be like, you're going to die a death of 1,000 cuts. Is it just like a Google Doc with like, that they kind of Command F across? Is like a Notion site, or like, what do you guys use for that?
It's a Google Doc. It is
Great.
25, 27 pages long, table of contents, organized like a little book. It's just organized like a little book. And
I
it
love
went
it.
over so well that we've made it for the other roles as well.
Nice.
Because, one of the things that you said, it just triggered something else in my head. We have AEs who are fantastic, and they were SDRs previously, but
Yeah.
their onboarding was so different. Their onboarding was pre-COVID. And when they come to us, they say, hey, Teri, how do we get them working faster and better? Well, I used to do it this way. Well, the way you did it is not the way that it can be done today. We're just not in that world. So we've really, I've emphasized with my team, we're big on listening tours. I force my team to do listening tours all the time. I shouldn't say force. I encourage. Now they do it on their own. I encourage. And
we're internal vendors. Let's go talk to our customers.
Right. And that's how you really start uncovering what's the real pain versus what's my perceived pain you have.
Yeah.
No different than selling. No different.
I love that. And that is like a really big challenge too. Like onboarding. So onboarding is really powerful because it's like, exactly what your job is right now. You're here to onboard, right? And like but the problem is, especially in high growth startups, and like, CB Insights is a big kid company, but it's still like, a mid-stage startup. Like the business moves so much, like things change. So like when the AE in question, and so what ends up happening is like they'll have their own skill gaps because like they were onboarded in that kind of like organic onboarding via osmosis kind of thing.
Exactly
And so like how do you like loop back and like do the deltas on those like missing skills?
So that is a fantastic question. I will not say we have that figured out completely.
It's the hardest part.
I'll tell you what our approach is right now. We do skill will analysis and heat map against that. We also take the heat mapping and triangulate it with performance metrics. And then we have sales readiness scores that we get out of MindTickle. And so between 3 of those things, we can better understand where the gaps are. You can actually then, again, take top performers, figure out the quadrants of here's my top performers, here's my lower performers. And so there's ways of doing it. All of it takes work. I wish I could say it's like press a button and I get this magic, output of here's what everybody's got.
I think it turns out that everything takes work. And then that's like the secret sauce is just like, don't be afraid to do work.
Yeah.
But yes.
So that's how we're solving for that piece today. And that is helping then to inform where we spend our time, where we enhance onboarding. And then again, it's a feedback loop, going back and seeing we not only roll out, but we measure. So we'll do a 3-month, 6-month, we actually sit there and we just continually measure the performance of our new hires so we can see what we're doing and what's working and what's not.
Yeah. There was a really good question here from Dave. Hopefully I'm not going to mess up Dave's last name, Chwalik. He has do you have any recommendations on a resources for creating an outline for a training and development program that is like inclusive of both onboarding and continual learning? I think Hannah actually dropped some resource here on onboarding and ramp. Do you know of any like online resources or anything like that around kind of like where someone might go and learn about like what a holistic onboarding and kind of ongoing training plan might look like?
There's a lot out there, to be quite honest with you.
Maybe we can find one after the fact.
Yeah, I don't have one that just pops into my head. I would say going into the Sales Enablement Society or Sales Enablement Collective and looking for some of those resources. I mean, I think a lot of the sales enablement leaders I know, we all kind of have our own that we've put together. So happy to share. But as far as like something that's stock, I guess I don't know that there's something that exists like that.
We need you to write it and then publish it.
Okay, sounds good.
That,
In my
as
spare
if you
time.
don't, as if I was just gonna say, as if you don't have enough, like, with the kids this weekend, and or like, on all the soccer and all the lacrosse and what have you. I am like, your comment about teaching life skills. I think
Mhm,
that's one of the things that organizations really miss on,
mhm,
and it's not just like SDRs, it's also AEs, and I think it's funny because we were talking before, and obviously you're a mom many times over. Like it really is like there's a lot of kind of like parenting behaviors going on there, like teaching life skills. And I think oftentimes managers, especially junior managers, really
mhm.
kind of like they shy away from that because they're afraid that they're going to insult somebody's intelligence or like hurt their ego or whatever, by saying like, here's how to use a calendar,
Mhm,
or here's how to manage your inbox,
mhm.
or here's how to manage your tabs on your computer.
Right,
and
right.
and so but and what they do is they blanch from providing that feedback.
Mhm.
And so what you end up with is like a rep with like 50 tabs of like Chrome across their screen, and they can't find anything, and it's utter disaster. And this is something that I wouldn't say that, like, I mean, we actually do have a part of our onboarding program that actually is like tool, like
Okay,
not just like outreach or like,
right.
Zoom or anything like that. It's like, here's how to manage your calendar. And we do have like, yeah, so and then we have kind of like behaviors in our organization around that, like, hey, you're supposed to paint your calendar this way, you're supposed to like, block times and what have you. We have kind of like mantras around that, et cetera. But I mean, what we've done is we've instantiated a culture of like, this is the Atrium way around like
Mhm.
how to manage your calendar, how to manage your inbox. We're actually very like explicit about it, as opposed to like, yeah, you can work however way you want to work.
Right.
I feel that like my point of view on that is that that's very often an abdication of responsibility on the part of the manager,
Mhm.
being masked as being like accommodating versus like, hey, here's the way that we run this system. If you want to like, so learn this, like learn this playbook, and then I want you to use your big brain and add variations to that and improve it or whatever. But I don't want you to just like jump in there and be like doing free form poetry from the get-go, because like that's not fair to you.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what we do in our playbooks too. We have that same, it's the instruction, and it feels almost remedial when you're putting it together, where you say,
Yeah,
how
but
do I, but the reality is they're not getting it anywhere else.
exactly.
And they're not, their response is fantastic. The responses we've got is, thank you, we needed this. The other
Mhm.
thing that you said is really true too, being these newly appointed managers, they themselves are so uncomfortable having
Oh
tough
my gosh.
conversations. They don't have the experience coaching.
Yep.
They don't have the experience, even just their own life experiences, at least what we're seeing. Many of
Mhm.
them don't, not that parenting's good or bad or other, it's many just haven't had enough life lessons to be able
Yep.
to give any kind of advice that they
Don't
feel
do that. That's the stove. Don't touch
right,
the hot stove. Don't
right.
don't touch the hot stove.
So, like I said earlier, enablement is starting to step in, and we're realizing we're going to have to help in partnership with the people team in some places.
God
We have
bless.
to fill some of those gaps. And so, we've actually, funny enough, we started running a manager session. So, what I do is
Love it.
every other week, we actually do, it's called the Enablement Leadership Series. And so, I personally train our mid level managers on
Love
this
it.
type of stuff. And
Yep.
again, the response has been phenomenal. I wasn't quite sure how it was going to go over, but there was enough poking around and saying, "Hey, what do you think? What do you think?" They're like, "Please do this. Please teach us." And so, I mean, I'd encourage others. I think we especially think, "Oh, people wouldn't be interested." They're actually really interested because they're not finding those types of experiences and insight in other places.
Oh, dude, I couldn't agree more, because like if you think about where most managers come from, especially in like a early stage environment, a mid stage environment, it's battlefield promoted reps, AEs who have been moved into AE management, or SDRs who moved into SDR management, and what have you.
Mhm.
And so, because we're moving so fast, very rarely is there an investment in teaching them how to do management. I mean, this is like kind of the core value proposition of Atrium. Is like, our whole claim is that it's not fair to managers to ask them to, they don't naturally have like an analytical bent per se. And so
Right.
what we want to do is allow them to use data and manage biometric in a simplified way that allows them to do that. But there's a whole human component of it as well, which is, okay, well, how do you actually, like, once you have the insight, like, oh, okay, Bobby's activities are low, or like Susie has a conversion rate problem out of this stage right here, or like Frankie has a pipeline hygiene problem. Well, now you have to have like a candid conversation and bridge that gap. And it's just super absent. And so it's so like, not all of our customers have a Teri. And so one of the things that we do actually is we have a gentleman named Richard Harris who does a lot of sales enablement consulting, and we literally have him doing like a manager boot camp for all of our customers on a recurring basis. We just have him doing it once a month. And like 40 people show up, and it's like has nothing to do with data-driven sales management, because like our CS team can handle that around like, oh, this is how to like read your dashboards or have alerts or like check goals or whatever. This is literally about like, let's role play having an awkward conversation.
Yes. I love that. That's one of the sessions we did. It was how to have difficult conversations, because that is a difficult conversation. So that's great. I love that you guys are doing that.
Yeah, and I think that the good news is that I think what people are coming to realize is that there's a lot of there's a lot of leverage in having good managers, because if you have all, like, I mean, you were saying this earlier, if you have your enablement people doing one-off trainings, that's not high leverage. But if we can make our managers way better, that can then be amortized across 6 AEs, 8 AEs, 10 SDRs, 12 SDRs, whatever it is. And now we've got all of our managers, our 4, 6, 8 managers who are like have superpowers. Now that's like super leverage. And the good news is there's a number of books that are kind of have been coming out recently around this. There's like Corey Bray's 5 Secrets of the Sales Coach, which I really love. It's like super fun. Michelle Vezana's Crushing Quota, which is, so she was like the co-author on Cracking the Sales Management Code with Jason Jordan. That was all about like data-driven sales management. And then Crushing Quota is like how you bridge it to actually like the management behavior. Like Cracking the Sales Management Code is like the sales ops side, like, hey, I'm going to analyze the business. And then this was like, okay, well, like, how do you turn it into like changing
the
rep
change
behavior?
The action, yes.
Yeah. So can you expand a little bit more on like what you're doing in order to enable those managers?
So similar to the playbook, we're actually in the middle of putting a manager playbook together, because there's there's gaps all over the place, right?
Yep.
Gap number 1 is great. I was individual contributor, now I'm the manager. What does that mean?
Yep.
What is the role of a manager? And interesting, I think I mentioned this to you before, like Simon Sinek talked about leadership, and it's a really quick video, but I love it so much, because what he talks about is leadership. You can't just turn it on and turn it off.
Sure.
I mean, when you're promoted, when you're promoted at that level,
now it's time to lead. Now I'm going to stop.
And probably the way it resonated with me so well is because the analogy he used is parenting. Parenting doesn't just turn on and turn off as much as we love it to some days. It's 24/7. And so get right. Sorry, I'm not your mom today.
Doesn't work.
He uses that as a great analogy. And so one, we're trying to win the hearts and minds of the managers to help them understand that piece of it, the human element of it, which is its own thing. The other side of it is just the process behind being a manager. What are the tools? What are the processes? What are the things that I am responsible for versus things that I should look to others for insight? And then helping, like you said, I think the biggest gap we're finding and we're working on fulfilling in this playbook is, I have the insight, I have the data. What do I do with it? How do I coach to it? And then how do
the behavior?
Yeah, how do I hold them accountable? Because we've had a few managers that are doing a really great job, but then they're getting stuck on well, where are you at with it? Have we seen
what now?
Right. I don't know. I didn't check back in. But
yeah, it's the recurring accountability. I forget who it was I was talking. Oh, it was Robbie Halford who was talking about this. He's over at Sparrow now. He used to lead enablement at Heap, and then before that at Malwarebytes. The random acts of enablement, right?
Okay.
He talks about, like, he's like, no random acts of enablement. No, just like drive-by coaching. right?
Yeah.
It's like a rhythm, it's a process. It's like, hey, here's like the missing, like here's our skill gap that we've identified, whatever it is. Like we were saying earlier, like, hey, you have a pipeline hygiene skill gap. I can see it right here. Look at your untouched opportunities compared to everybody else. Come on, let's fix this. And then it can't just be like, go fix that. It's like, no, we're gonna fix this. Do it, like what do you think is potentially driving this? Let's co-create a hypothesis of like where this is coming from. Oh, my calendar's messy, or like I'm overloaded on ops, or whatever it is. Okay, wonderful. Here's the prescription that we're going to do, and this is the timeline that we're going to do it on it, and then this is the negative implication. It's kind of like MedPick. Like there's the negative implications associated with not fixing it. Here's the positive benefits associated with fixing it. And then guess what? We're going to create a ticket like in this Google Doc or maybe some special software or whatever, and we're going to come back in 2 weeks and we're going to see where this metric's at.
Right. And you know what? I love what you just said about it's really getting to the root cause. And we're finding that a lot as well, challenging our managers. It's, hey, I think this is the problem. I have them go through the 5 why exercise. It's root cause analysis 101. Why? And what's great about that too is I think we do a great job of addressing and trying to solve for surface level. And it's, again, surface level pain with our managers from an enablement perspective, and don't spend enough time critically thinking about what really is driving this. Is there something else happening behind the scenes? So, again, no different than sales or no different than anything else that's happening in the business, but
that's a really good point about like the root cause and the 5 whys. I'm a big like process, unsurprisingly, I'm a big process guy. And so like I've done a lot of reading on like, Toyota manufacturing system and kind of like, and that's like where in part, like I like to say that Atrium is kind of the outcome of like 2 books. One is The Goal, which is a process engineering book written as a novel. It's quite fun. Doesn't sound fun. It is fun. And then the other one is Bill Walsh's The Score Takes Care of Itself, which is like, look, just like focus on high quantity of high quality inputs. You can't worry about the outcomes, but we can control these inputs right here. And so I think that like when people don't, if they don't go to that like next level, like what is the root cause? They're like, oh, you have a pipeline hygiene problem, figure it out. Well, that's like not helpful, right? Versus like, okay, like why do we have all these untouched ops? Oh, is it because, oh my goodness, you have 80 ops in your pipe. Everybody else has 30. What's going on here? Oh, I didn't realize we were supposed to close lost them. Oh, okay. Well, like that's why now I see why your sales cycle is so insane. Okay, cool. Well, so see over here in the sales playbook where it says like our rules of engagement on opportunities. If you don't have like a next meeting on the calendar and haven't had an inbound email in this amount of time, you're supposed to close it out. Oh gosh, I didn't realize that. Okay, cool. Can you go ahead and block 3 hours on the calendar and clean your pipe out? And the good news is now you're going to get like top back up on the round robin. Everyone wins.
Yeah, that is so incredibly, that is just spot on. That is so spot on.
You've never seen that story before.
No, but what it made me think about is going back to that challenging or harnessing your inner challenger presentation that I had done. That one's on the 5 deadly sins of enablement, and number 4 is on preconceived notions. And again, these are just my thoughts around it. So, again, take it for what it's worth. But what you just said about, the 5 whys, it's this preconceived notion that we know what the problem is, but don't spend the time doing the investigating and the listening tour. And I'll give you an example. And this is the example I give in it is there was an organization I worked for, and the preconceived notion was that the SDRs were just not performing. They weren't working. Sure. They literally believe they're not even working, Teri. I don't know what they're doing, but MQLs, they're not prosecuting against those. The activity levels aren't where they need to be. They're unclear about, various different things within the organization. After we got done doing a listening tour, what we uncovered? Yep. We uncovered that people really didn't know how to do their job. We uncovered people didn't know what an MQL stood for.
Sure.
People didn't have any kind of metric or activity metric that they were being held accountable. So when you're saying, hey, why are you not making your calls today?
I am making some calls.
Yeah. So
how many was I supposed to do?
So again, it was just this, I think I know from a leadership perspective, I think I know what it is. So it's this, and just taking the time to really dig into it and realize that there's some robust underlying conditions that have have to be addressed first and foremost, and then you start seeing the momentum. So, there's so many things that came out of that storyline, but you have to be so careful with the whole that idea.
Preconceived notions. Well, this is when I read Five Secrets of the Sales Coach. One of the things I really loved about it was, and you do this in kind of like role playing. A good management conversation oftentimes feels like a really good discovery conversation, right? Where you're asking open-ended questions. They're not closed-ended, right? And then more like you can have a hypothesis of what's going on, and like you can ask provocative questions, right? But like not showing them, be like, hey, you have this thing. Hey, why do you think? Why do you think that I'm observing this conversion rate problem out of discovery here? Where do you think that might be coming from, right? And like let's talk about that together,
right.
And then also continuing that line of like asking provocative questions. We're like, so given the fact that everybody gets the kind of the same number of opportunities from marketing here, what do you think like is the negative implication associated with continuing to have this poor conversion rate out of discovery? Gosh, Teri, I guess now that you bring that up, I guess like, much fewer of my opportunities are probably going to get into the middle of the pipeline. Yeah, what do you think the implication of that might be for quota attainment? Gosh, that's a really good point. Right?
Oh, great question. Yes, you couldn't have said it better. It's like a really good provocative conversation. Yes, I love that.
I love it. So when continuing the thread on like on training managers, what's your favorite topic to train managers on as of late? I think you mentioned like accountability earlier. What are you guys doing there?
Yes, we've got two things right now that we just trained on. One was accountability and the other was trust. And so, accountability speaks for itself, but again, what we're seeing is just the continuity in what do I hold them accountable to specifically? Where's the data to do that? Thankfully, we have Atrium. But where's the data to do that? And then how do I have that conversation? And then what's the change management behind what am I going to do to help change the behavior, and how I'm going to track the changes to that? So we really worked on that entire exercise, and there's quite a few different things that came out of that as well, different frameworks that we were using. The trust, that was an interesting one, and I will say,
how do you like engender that? That's it. Like, how do you like train managers to be like more trustworthy? I don't like, that's obviously not the right phrase, but like to engender more trust, manufacture more trust.
Yes,
here, like sprinkle some more trust on it. That doesn't work.
Right. Just do it. So actually the way that we started out the training was I asked each of them to go take 5 minutes, and for each of their team members, write on a piece of paper as many things as they could about each individual person on their team. What do you know about them? And what's interesting is if you go through the exercise, when they came back, I asked the question, how many of you had more than 3 things for each individual? Most people raise their hands. How many have more than 5? Only a few people's hands stayed up.
Totally.
How many have more than 7, more than 10? Long story short, we had a lot of managers, and I say a lot, 98% of them that didn't really know anything about their team. So the way to get into the conversation is you can't establish trust until somebody feels comfortable being vulnerable enough with you to tell you information about their life. So how are you engaging, and how are you showing up to the conversations? Are you generally interested in, hey, hey, how was your weekend? Okay, well, that's great. Let's start looking at the dashboard. And then everybody laughs, because that's how a lot of these meetings go, these one-on-ones and how they're structured. And so there's elements of getting into, how do you also working with them on, the question was, Teri, how do I ask a question about somebody's life without crossing like the line? Well, you learn how to listen critically. It's active listening, right? Actively listen, follow on, just like you would in a sales call. That's interesting. Tell me more about that. Can you help me understand?
Let's go.
That's how you do that. And then those are those little nuggets you put away wherever you do that.
You gotta file them. Yep.
File them and then follow up. The other example, this is what I do with my team, and I know that our customer success team actually is now doing this, is I have my team go through a yearly and a quarterly planning where they have to list out their personal goals as well as their professional goals, and then a team that they want to start to get to know better. And the first time they said, why do you want to know what my personal goals are? I said, because part of my job is to help you be more successful in your life, just in your life. If I'm a really good leader, it means that I truly care about you and care about your development beyond here. So it's great. My conversations are, oh, hey, your goal is to run a marathon. Awesome. How do I help you do that? I may not be running beside you, but maybe I spend time finding different resources, different times during the day, and I send them your way. Or I'm just the one that encourages you and I say, hey, how did the race go last week? Those are the things that I brought back to the team and said, those are things that will help build trust with your teams. And then once you have the trust with your teams, that's what the convergence into, hey, how do I better delegate? Well, now your team trusts you. They trust your vision. They trust where you're taking them. Not only are they going to want to deliver, but they will deliver. And you can start working on, again, the next topic was, how am I going to delegate? How do I start delegating? So that's a huge thing to unpack. And you could talk about that for hours.
It's crazy. Like, it's so funny as you were talking about that. There, another awesome Minnesotan sales leader, Tammy Sexton, over at Launch Darkly. So she does enterprise sales. She's absolutely fantastic. She does enterprise sales. And of course, like in an enterprise sale, like Launch Darkly is like not a low average selling price product to begin with. And like she leads the enterprise, actually the commercial segment now as well. Moving on up. But like when you're talking about like 200K deals, 500K deals, it's like not really about like features anymore. It's like, are you gonna screw me? Because like this is a meaningful partnership. Like we're getting married for the next 3 years. And so she has this like whole framework around like signifiers of trust. Where she's like, hey, look, do you have a texting relationship with them? Everybody knows that, right? Do you have a texting relationship with them? Have you sent them emojis and then they sent them back? Fun, right? And she's like, have they cursed in front of you?
Oh, now you're getting into the vulnerability piece. Okay.
Exactly, right. And so as you were talking about that with respect to the reps, I was like, oh my gosh, this like totally reminds me of, and like she literally has a scorecard for her reps around like how much actual trust do I have with my champion in this deal. And I think you're nailing it with respect to the reps. And so then the question then becomes like, how do you elicit that information? A couple of ways that like I go about eliciting that information in order to kind of create that trust framework. One of the things that we do in our sales team meeting on Monday mornings is we ask people for the highlight of their weekend. And so the reason why we do that, like it's fine, it's like, like low calorie or whatever, but what ends up happening is like kind of pieces of like what they're into start poking out, right? Like, oh, well, I DJ'd a show this weekend, and people are like, and then someone else is like, I ran a Tough Mudder. Oh, wow, that's exciting. And then someone else says like, oh, I watched the Warriors play. And they say that a couple different times. And you're like, okay, this person's like really into the Warriors, right? And so then you file those away. So that's one thing. The other thing that I like to encourage my managers to do is have quarterly dinners with their staff individually, right? Because like you sit and you have dinner for like an hour and a half or whatever, and like hopefully your talk listen time is very good and you're speaking like 40% of the time or 30% of the time, and you're just like asking them questions, and then you file those away. And then what you do is, as you were saying, then you have to deliver. So like we have this really talented customer success manager on our team, a gentleman named Richard Lynn, and he's really into like side businesses. It's absolutely fantastic. He's like super bright. He used to do sales. Like a lot of our customer success folks come from a sales operations background. He used to do sales ops at Meraki and Google and what have you. And so he's really into like side businesses and kind of like small businesses or whatever, because he's just like a really thoughtful guy. And we spent like a half hour at our dinner talking about the business mechanics of vending machines.
Oh,
right. I know, right?
Okay.
Totally. He like unpacked it for me, and I was like, oh, this is really crazy. Like I had never like thought about this, and kind of like the business dynamics associated with them. And so now whenever I pass a vending machine, I take a picture of it and I text it to him.
That's so great. That is awesome. And actually, you just triggered something else for me. Fabio, who I report into, the one thing he has on his calendar once a month with each of us is a non-content one-on-one. And I remember the first time that I had that with him, I was a little bit, what do you want me to talk about?
Where's the agenda? This is like, am I supposed to dance?
But that is it's exactly what you're talking about. And I've actually now done that a couple different times with some of the leaders where we'll have one-on-one and I'll simply say, hey, we're not talking about work this is not a work conversation. Let's talk about anything else you want to talk about. And it's the same thing as the vending conversation. It's really started to bridge gaps internally with trust. And I think like these go back to, these are life lessons. If you can teach the other groups, the younger mid-level managers, if you can teach them these things, that's applicable all the way through their career and in their life. So you're not going to miss anything at that point.
Yeah, and then they'll carry them along with you. And I mean, this is one of the things that I always kind of, when I'm hiring new reps or new leaders or whatever, I actually have a whole deck on like why it's rad to work in the Atrium go-to-market organization, and like a bunch of the slides are our alumni, or sorry, not Atrium alumni, because we don't really have any alumni because like we retain really well and we're like growing and what have you. But it's like my last couple companies, and I'm like, hey, here is Robert Perez. He was an AE at Talent Bin, and then he was the first head of sales at Chorus, and then he was the head of West Coast sales at Drift, and now he's the head of sales at Security Pal. That will be you someday. This is Manny Ortega. He was an SDR at Talent Bin, and then he did sales operations at Talent Bin, and then he was one of the first sales operations people at Outreach, and now he runs sales ops at Redis Labs. Right? And so like helping people see that. Well, first you got to throw down and actually deliver it. Right. So you have your success stories. I guess they're like successful customers or happy customers, if you will, customer testimonials. And then you can put that forward and say like, hey, look, this is what we're going to deliver for you. And it really helps with your, recruiting, and it also helps with your retention as well.
100%. 100%.
Yeah. The other thing I like to do with respect to trust is deliver. Which seems like pretty simple, where, like, I think this is the thing that you have to be careful about is like, sales is hard. And so people, it is easy to complain because like, there are lots of things that are broken. Totally. Like, prospects are going to be a pain in your ass, and like, a deal that was a lock is going to evaporate, and so on and so forth. So what can be really powerful is when people say, hey, I'm missing this asset, right? Whether it's like, hey, this like email template is kind of like crappy, or I'm missing this email template right here. I'm missing this slide, or this slide is whatever. If you can then deliver and show them like, hey, look, you said this thing and I delivered for you, right? Notice how I delivered for you at like, 9 a.m. on Saturday before I like took my son to soccer practice or whatever.
Right.
Now I need you to deliver.
Right. Yeah. The yin and yang, the give, get, that, the yin and yang, that's a huge piece of it as well. And making sure people understand how critical that is. But again, these are things I think we overlook. We just assume people on our teams know that. So bringing that back and having those tough conversations. We actually have a session in our discovery all about give and get. And it's
really,
and it's, again, targeted towards our prospecting, but the give, get of price. So again, conceptually the same thing, but totally. So important to have that and the validation that, okay, I can trust you and I can be vulnerable with you. So
Teri, you should in all your free time, you should put a keynote deck together on sales and management, and how management is sales, because it's all like everything we were talking about here. It's like, the discovery. Yeah, it's really fascinating.
I say marriage is sales as well. Any marriage is sales. I mean, we're always negotiating, right? And it's the truth. All our partnerships, whatever you're in, it's all a negotiation. So it's selling.
Yeah. Kind of changing gears a little bit, as we've been talking about managers a bunch, which is really fantastic. When you think about what your kind of is top of mind for enabling reps right now, I think you had kind of mentioned earlier that that being capable of being a trusted advisor is a really big thing. How are you guys going about that?
So we have a massive initiative going on right now. It's really all centered around value-based selling and helping the team move from this transactional selling model into the value-based selling model. So, you know, the one at the commercial level, the buying experience and the selling experience is different. It is more transactional versus enterprise. So, you know, helping the teams understand the difference there, but overall up-leveling everybody to be more intellectually curious, to be more of a critical thinker. So there's significant amount of training. We're really leveraging different components of what Challenger has. So the commercial teaching, leading with insight, helping the team to better understand how do I use insights about my prospects in my conversation, whether that's how they're engaging in the content, how long they're engaging on certain pages of the content, using that in my conversation. I do a ton of coaching around LinkedIn. What are they sharing on LinkedIn? What kind of activity are they engaging with? When do who are they connected to? Using Team Link and seeing who else they're connected to. You know, looking at the website, what are they hiring for? Googling them, finding out what are they have they written anything? What are they being, you know, is there an award that they were nominated for? But just really trying to get more knowledgeable both about the individual and then getting really smart in your space. So we also talk a lot about, you know, depending on the vertical, you need to know your space and how do I become an expert in that space and spending the time, which again goes back to the playbooks. I get people asking me this question. Well, Teri, how much time should I spend doing this? Interesting question. How much time will it take for you to be an expert? Well, I don't know. I said, well, that's the answer. I don't know how much time, because here's one thing, it's always changing. It's an ever changing, you know, vicious circle, but the goal being that we help enable you to be a step ahead as each of these changes happen. And so it's giving them the right resources. It's making sure that we're curating the most relevant content. One thing we're doing that's new, which I absolutely love, is we've started partnering, Enablement started partnering with the IU, our analysts, and our analysts have been tremendously helpful.
Because they're so expert.
They are. And so this is, like I said, new, but we're finding an unbelievable amount of value in doing this. And that's not only helping us position things differently, but it's helping me think about things differently, which is translating better with the field. So it's really, like I said, it's all about that mindset shift of no more feature and benefit, no more show up and throw up, no more just going right into the product. You know, I love
Harbor Cruise.
Right,
over here.
Right. It's just, you know,
over here, over here.
But being much better at identifying, again, what are we solving for in the first place? What is it? What is the business value? How are they going to benefit both personally and professionally? And we talk about that as well and go through trainings on, as you know, depending on the persona, what are they experiencing and why is this so relevant to them? Because they're going to have to internally sell this. So you better build trust with them. By building trust with them, you'll find out those key levers that you can start pulling with your champion to help them champion and campaign for you inside. And again, like there's a million books on this, but that's our big model right now is shifting in that direction and getting them up leveled.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that you have to do there as well is operationalize it. Because it's one thing to like go read this book over here. It's kind of like your thing you were saying earlier about like turning leadership on and turning leadership off. It's like go read this book over here, now come apply it, versus I'm a big playbooks guy, big checklist guy, shocking. And so one of the things you were kind of talking about like going on LinkedIn and like looking at XYZ, that's literally in our pre-call planning checklist, right? So we have a big Google Doc of how to run a first call. It's literally got like, this is the 15 minutes before your call, right? Is like, go on LinkedIn, you know, find your icebreaker. If you talk about the weather, you have failed, right? Go look on their LinkedIn profile, scroll down to like where they went to college or whatever, like look for the different things, like, oh, okay, cool, we're going to talk about like I know ahead of time that I'm going to bring up Tough Mudders with Teri, and then like boom, we're like already we're already like 10 yards ahead in the
Right.
race of trust creation, and I look like a hero, right?
Mhm.
Like, oh, you're so thoughtful, Pete. So
Mhm.
that's one of the things that we do there in order to facilitate that, because like, again, if you wait for reps to like derive this on their own, ideally you have bright reps who are going to figure it out, but like, why would you wait, right? Like,
Well, right. And we go through a bonding and rapport session and equate it back to dating.
I love it.
Right. I need to build a rapport with you to even get you to go out on a date with me. I'm not going to ask you to marry me on my first date, but the reality is a customer likely is not going to sign with you on your first conversation. So you have to build your own credibility with them and build that rapport. Yeah, it's going to take some time, but you have to, it is a skill, because there's that authenticity that comes through, or inauthenticity that comes through when you're just trying so hard. And it's also helping them understand you have to be authentic. You can't show up, ask the question and be like, okay, well, I did my warmer. No, there's an active listening element to this. Great.
Right. Ask the second level question.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So doing, and that's the other thing that people don't realize is that, or oftentimes reps don't realize, is that the rapport doesn't close the deal. The rapport gets you candid disco answers versus bullshit disco answers, right? And then now you've got real you got real information. You have the right to be like provocative. Now you have to deliver some insights. That's where the expertise comes in. One of the ways that we try to help drive expertise, again, because like random acts of enablement, thank you, Robbie Halford, doesn't work. You got to systematize things. One is like we have pre-work ahead of, so when somebody signs with Atrium, we have a Google Doc that has like a couple pages of stuff. Like a bunch of chorus calls and kind of things like that, but also just like webinars that I've done and what have you. The other thing, and so people can consume that, we also will send them books, like my book and some of these other ones we've talked about. We also have an ongoing professional development reading series that we call Smart as a Fox, because Atrium is all about foxes. And literally what it is, there's a list of like a dozen books that people, we actually haven't made it such that like you have to read one per quarter. Some teams actually have done that. But what ends up happening is, someone can read a book like The Challenger Sale or 5 Secrets of the Sales Coach or Cracking the Sales Management Code. Then they write up a book report and they get a $250 Amazon gift card. Now it's, well, I mean, because what I did was I went through it and I was like, this is like, reading this book is going to be like 6, 8, 10 hours, right? And then writing it up is like, maybe another hour. Like, it's not nothing. And like, we should compensate for that. Like, yes, they are. It's essentially what you're doing is like, you're inducing somebody to like eat their broccoli.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
And people really like it.
I love that. We are doing book clubs. So each of the teams has a book that they're focused on. So SDRs are just finishing up Fanatical Prospecting, or no, they finished that up. I'm sorry.
I gotta read that.
Never Split the Difference. So,
nice.
They've done that. Qualified Sales Leader has been another one the sales team has done.
Good one.
Challenger Customer for the CS team. But what we found is those book clubs have been amazing. Now, not everybody shows up to those. So we have, I would call it, 50, 60% participation. But what we did find is the ones that show up, not only are they incredibly high in their level of contribution during that session, but we're also now seeing that they are tied to some of our higher performers. Now, I'm not saying it's because of the book club by any means, but indirectly, these are things that we go back and just say, hey, people that are interested in learning and self-development typically are some of your higher performers.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's literally I was doing the I was doing like the leaderboard for Smart as a Fox this morning, because like one of our new CSMs just like finished reading Cracking the Sales Management Code. And she wrote up this like bomb report on it, and like you have to email it to the whole company, and because what that does is that drives accountability. So like people aren't going to email something out that's like BS, so they're going to take their time and make it nice. And then what it does is it like socializes, like, oh man, this is a thing that like people do, especially high performers. And then you see like new people coming on and they do like one and then do like another one the next month, and then maybe people have like fallen off, are like, uh-oh, maybe I need to like, maybe I need to chop here. And it's really funny to say I was doing the leaderboard, and some of the folks who are at the top of the Smart as a Fox leaderboard are also just like extremely high performing and well regarded throughout the company. And it's like, oh, weird.
Yeah.
Shocking.
I wonder why. I love the idea. We might have to steal something about the gift cards. That's great.
Yeah, I like, on the one hand, I didn't want it to like feel transactional, but also it like feels not really like fair to ask people to like do reading outside of work and like not, not compensate for it. So this was like trying to be like a happy medium there.
Win. Win-win.
Yeah. The other thing that we really encourage our reps to do as much as possible is and like not every business motion can have this, but like Atrium has this kind of like cheater benefit where we sell on we sell on our prospects data. So like we show up and like people set up an account, it takes like 5 minutes. People are like, it really only takes 5 minutes. We're like, totally, you're just connect your CRM. And then what ends up happening is like the reps then guide them. They're like, hey, remember how you were worried about about Frankie's ramp? Well, here, look, you can see that you were right to be worried. You can see it right here. And they're like, oh, damn. It's like, yeah, cool. But like, now we can fix it, right? And make sure that he's going to be, successful going forward. And what I would recommend to everybody is like, how do you make that? Like, how can you do that in your own motion? Like CB Insights is like, I mean, like you guys' newsletter is bananas. It's so good, right? And so like, it's so good. And like, because you guys have all this information, so showing up with that information, it's like an amazing tease. And so what I would kind of like challenge everybody who's listening is like, how can you do that organizationally, right? Whether it's like benchmarking or what have you, right?
Right. Lead with insight. Same thing. Leading with insight.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what any kind of like other parting shots on big topics of sales enablement that like kind of top of mind for you? Obviously, we talked about like manager enablement, how high leverage it is. How do we help like our reps be more expert, et cetera. But anything else?
I think the last thing that comes to mind is really just more about the enablement space in general, because this has been something that's been asked quite a few times, and it's really just, Teri, how does enablement become more strategic? And how do we in enablement earn our seat at the table? And so I've spent a lot of time talking and actually writing and putting pieces together around it's the from and to. It's moving from this idea that it's all about putting butts in seat and moving to the focus on win rates and velocity and deal size and being very specific about the board and the leadership want predictability in business. So how are you in enablement showing up and having specific revenue outcomes? And how are you correlating that back? So I think, in terms of the enablement space, that's how enablement has to show up. That's this new evolution of where enablement's at today. I think as it translates into every other part of the business, sales is sales. I think we're selling too. And I think the biggest thing is just, as much as you can, get in the weeds with your sellers. Don't be afraid to get in the weeds with your sellers to really understand. Like we said, it's root cause analysis every single day. And don't be afraid to just make a choice and execute. I mean, we talk about that a lot at the office too. Make a decision. If it's the wrong decision, we'll learn from that,
reassess.
and we're going to reassess, and we're going to try something else. But we're not going to just sit there and idle and vacillate. We're going to make it
right. We're not gonna be paralyzed with analysis. Right. Yeah, I think one thing that really resonated with me with what you were saying right there is, obviously a lot of people are thinking about how the sales operations function changes as marketing plus sales plus CS are more tightly integrated around, so I'm not a huge fan of like the revenue operations title, because I'm just like, oh, it's like sales operations, but like with more syllables, right? But I think the point still stands. We're like, especially when you have land and expand, motions where you're not selling like a big dog contract up front, like you have to deliver value and then continue to expand. So like sales and CS have to be cohesive and like remarketing and blah, 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 blah. And all the systems are getting more tightly integrated. I think that actually has a lot of implications as relates to enablement. Right? Absolutely. Because like, you can't just be like, oh, sales enablement, you're here to talk to the AEs. It's like, well, no, like, the SDRs and the AEs and CX all have to be talking the same language, right?
Yeah.
And like they have to like, and we have to be delivering, like leading with insight across this whole thing here, right? And so expanding the purview of sales enablement such that even up to like product
even
and
up to product.
engineering, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and you have to have representation, whether it's specific or not. I know in our team we have a designated CS enablement person. We have
Good.
designated SDR, designated AE. We have designated operations and tools. We have designated performance. And what's that? That's really allowed us to get better at specializing and honing our craft, but more importantly, making sure that they have enough resource from enablement. And I agree with you. I mean, we have to be so tightly connected with all of those stakeholders and making sure we understand. Otherwise, it very quickly can dissipate and become siloed again.
Yeah. And what's so great about that is that all those people sit on Teri's squad. So they all share a brain. And then when they go out to their business partners, there's continuity across it.
Exactly. Exactly. What's the golden thread all the way through?
Yeah. Well, Teri, this was super rad. As I noted earlier, the time was going to fly. Thank you so much for coming and dropping knowledge. It was absolutely fantastic. And as as with most of these conversations, I come away extraordinarily invigorated and with a bunch of like little nuggets that I need to start executing within my organization. I hope that was the case with everybody else. I hope you have an awesome weekend. We're going to be off next week on Power Hour because I'm joining my 4-year-old's preschool graduation. But then we're going to be coming back. Thank you. We're going to be coming back the week after that. I think with Sean Tatarian, the head of sales development at Grin. So Teri, thank you very much, and you have an awesome weekend.
Yes, you too. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, bye.
Bye.